Welcome back to Reviews with Elaine, because I have opinions, and today's opinions will be about Raise the Blood by Nenia Campbell. And yeah, this is another one of those books that as I was reading it, I was going, how am I going to talk about this online without sounding absolutely unhinged? This book is just a lot, and in my personal opinion, it's a very enjoyable lot. But let's see what I can say about it without turning bright red. So Raise the Blood follows Nadine, an exceptionally anxious young woman, who only has her sister and her aunt as her entire family. When out of the blue, she receives an invite to her sister's wedding in the middle of nowhere to a man she has never even heard of before, she goes with some trepidation. Nadine has a bad feeling about all of this, and when a year later her sister stops responding to any messages and sends her a postcard that reads as a cry for help, Nadine drops everything to return to the Coleraven estate, only to find her sister is not there. The Coleraven family insists that Noelle just disappeared a few weeks ago, though they seem completely uninterested in trying to find her. Nadine refuses to just accept that her sister, has vanished off of the face of the planet, and so settles down into this tiny little town to search for any sign of where Noelle went. But the longer she's there, the more she gets the feeling something is very, very wrong here. The townsfolk clearly hate the Coleravens, even though the family's money and their annual hunting festival is the only thing really keeping this town alive. The sheriff treats a missing person less seriously than a missing dog, and the Coleravens in general treat Nadine like a minor annoyance at best, and a toy to be broken at worst. Except for maybe Cal, the youngest son of the family, a terrifyingly gorgeous and intimidating lawyer, watches Nadine with an interest that she finds an equal part flattering and terrifying. But as Nadine begins to hunt down the breadcrumbs her sister left behind, she will slowly come to realize that she is being hunted in return, and the predators hunting her can taste blood in the water. And yeah, again, with this one, I do want to start with the fact that there are warnings in the beginning of the book, and I do 100% suggest you look at them and take them very, very seriously. If anything, I'd say the warnings listed in this one are just a hair softly phrased for what actually happens in this book. Like, not that anything is, missing, not that there's anything that I'm like, that does not, cover it, but, depiction of hunting almost underplays what is actually happening in the book. And I think I was just spoiled by the sheer level of specificity that Wicked Flavors had. And it is sort of a bit interesting to me, and this is a good jumping off point to talk about this book, because objectively, what happened on the page in Wicked Flavors, the last book I read, is in many ways significantly more violent, more horrifying, more extreme than this book. But Raise the Blood felt definitively darker. And a lot of it comes down to, of course, the different tones of the two books. Wicked Flavors comes across as playful, whereas Raise the Blood is like a nightmare that you sort of want to go back to sleep so you can continue. You're just sort of into it in a weird way. And how that effect is achieved is really interesting to me. First of all, we have two very different main characters who react to the events in very different ways. Yes, Gwen in Wicked Flavors does sometimes get frightened of what is happening to her, frightened of Ambrosius, frightened for Ambrosius, and just generally a bit scared sometimes, but the majority of her story comes across with her seeming more angry and annoyed than scared. Whereas Nadine is terrified almost the entire book. We languish in and even revel in her fear. We get visceral depictions and descriptions of the effects that fear has on her body. And we get very clear mirroring in the way fear and attraction react to her in her feelings, basically. Which is also just fun to me because, yeah, science backs up the fact that humans are actually really bad at differentiating the state of fear arousal and the state of sexual arousal. And a good example of how the book uses that, we're going to look at two passages, starting on page 101, that goes slowly, so slowly it felt like slow motion. He pulled back and started the engine, leaving her feeling as if she had just been painted all over in small, bristling needles of the most exquisitely cold ice. And then look at page 131. Where we get, being in Cal's presence was a little like boiling to death under a heat lamp. She felt dizzy and clumsy around him, so feverish she couldn't think of anything except him and what he'd do next. And she hated not knowing how to stop it, or if she even wanted to, because sometimes he said things to her that made her feel so fucking seen. And this is a good depiction of what I'm talking about with the difference in tone here. Even when we're getting those moments of showing Nadine's attraction to this man, it's still presented in a form that is highlighting fear. It is using descriptions that are almost painful or downright painful to show us the destructiveness mixed into the pleasant and enjoyable nature of this attraction. And it's setting up pretty early on for the fact that, yeah, a lot of this book, Nadine isn't entirely sure if she is terrified of Cal, drawn to him, or both. But that aside, the tone of almost constant anxiety sets a very different tone for the book entirely. And it's a tone I find really interesting, because for a huge portion of this book, it reads exactly like one of those old Gothic romances. Like, I wanted to fall down in the moors of England and read this book while wearing a black shawl and watching the crows circle over my head. Like, it was giving the perfect Jane Eyre vibes. It had the perfect metaphor and simile-heavy descriptions of the setting. It had the occasional bits of archaic vocabulary mixed into modern language. It had the past-obsessed introspection. All of this is so Gothic. It had the obsession with nature, but in a way that feels threatening more than calming. And it felt dark and brooding, and there was the constant feeling of maybe, just maybe, something supernatural is actually happening here. Like, if you walk away from this book thinking that Nadine was having haunted psychic dreams, I don't think you're wrong. And if you walk away from this book thinking that it was all her subconscious putting together what she was learning to give her an explicit warning in the form of a dream, all just natural instincts telling her, hey, look, those are red flags over there, I don't think you're wrong either. Like, either interpretation is valid, and that is such a Gothic literature trope. And it felt like we'd stepped back in time, even while in a modern setting. And very impressively, it never felt like it was discordant. I was never sitting there being like, why are we getting, cell phones in this Gothic literature? No, it all works beautifully to feel like you're reading a modern reinterpreting of a classic Gothic romance. But the thing is, those classic Gothic romances always have a moment when we find out the secret. And it turns out to be a secret that, yeah, does make the brooding love interest look bad, but generally is not a real threat to the heroine. Like, it's never something good, but the twist in this one is so much darker than I expected. And like, I went into this book having seen enough of the author's promo to know that there was going to be a good bit of violence, death, cult vibes, and rich people putting no value whatsoever on the lives of the less affluent. But damn! They were worse than I expected them to be! And the reveal still got me! And even knowing what kind of book I was reading, I was still waiting for the moment when we find out that it's not as bad as it looks at first glance. And so, in a very real way, this feels like you're reading a Gothic romance that looks at those other classic Gothic romances and says, cowards, watch this shit. And I still somehow at the end of this descent into beautiful Gothic madness end up feeling sympathy for the devil, which is an impressive feat considering the shit he pulls in this book. But the fact that I did sort of like the, antagonist slash love interest is what drove me as a reader to keep hoping for the second twist that would make things not as bad, while our main character Nadine is hoping for that as well. And it's what allows the happy ending to feel like an actual happy ending, even though in the real world, if this was really happening, it would be a horrifying ending. And I think that this is just a general masterpiece in tone, expectation, and building rapport with characters that you should not logically like. It's fascinating. But I also want to talk about Nadine as a protagonist. I really loved her. She was a physical ball of anxiety the entire time. Like, she is terrified of everything. And I'm pretty sure it's directly stated that she does have an anxiety disorder. It is stated that she used to take medicine for her anxiety. And beyond having that just general feeling of I get it, same vibes, like, oh my god, I feel represented by her anxiety. But the fact that she has such severe anxiety does some really useful things in the text. It allowed her to seem so incredibly weak, which gave her moments of strength so much more power. And this book does a really great job of showing us that Nadine fighting through her anxiety in many ways makes her so much stronger than someone who doesn't have that anxiety. Because for her, just walking into a store is often as terrifying as facing down a killer. Because of that, she's actually better prepared to deal with dealing with a killer. And also, the anxiety is a large part of what makes this book feel so gothic. Nadine is used to seeing the world, the normal world, as horrific. And at its core, a lot of what makes gothic literature gothic is that feeling of the normal being horrific and the horrific being beautiful. And yeah, that is at the core of Nadine's worldview, because she is so used to seeing horrors around her that she is capable of seeing the beauty in the horror and seeing the horror in the normal. But her actual anxiety disorder interweaves with the markers of the genre so perfectly. And on the most literal level, her anxiety actually helps the plot. For a good portion of this book, Nadine is staying in a situation where red flags are waving left, right, and center. Like, she is surrounded by red flags. And as a reader, you're going to be aware that there is something wrong in this town. The behavior of the townspeople, the active warnings that the townspeople keep giving her, the disregard of the authorities, the way the Colravens talk to Nadine, all of this is the sort of thing that would have anyone thinking, maybe I should go. Maybe I should talk to cops elsewhere. Maybe I should hire a PI. Maybe I should just give up and leave. And Nadine does think all these things, but she doesn't leave. And while I don't remember the book directly saying it, I as a reader was hyper aware of the fact that Nadine wasn't running because, to her, every flag looks red. Like, she is constantly seeing red flags in perfectly normal behavior, and so when she sees actual red flags, it's really hard for her to differentiate that those flags are dripping in blood. Like, honey, those are super red. And it makes perfect sense. There's a scene early on when she is in an Uber. I think it might be a taxi, but either way, she convinces herself that the driver is planning on attacking her. And, like, there's really no reason for her to convince herself of this. She just does, because that's what anxiety does to you. And, of course, there's no sign that he was planning on attacking her. She gets through that ride perfectly fine. Nothing goes wrong. And because of this, when she starts interacting with people who do want to attack her, it makes more sense for her to just be like, it's just anxiety. I'm not actually seeing these red flags. Everything is fine. And that does lead me to one of my minor complaints with the book. It did reach a point in the first section where my suspension of disbelief was hanging on by a thread that she wasn't getting out of there. I found it a bit unclear exactly how long she was staying in town before she ends up moving up to the house. When she moved up to the house, it makes perfect sense why she stays. I get it. That's all fine. But while she was in the town, it felt like she was there for more than a week, maybe even like 2 weeks. And she ran out of leads to follow in like 2 days. And it's weird to me because she was both really, totally, absolutely 100% sure that something bad has happened to Noelle, but is sort of acting like she's just waiting for her sister to show back up out of nowhere. And I kept wondering, why isn't she trying anything else? Why isn't she going to the next town over to ask after Noelle? Why isn't she trying to track Noelle's finances or seeing if she can find anything on travel records? Why isn't she trying to do the stuff that the cops should be doing, or at least insisting that they do so? And yes, a lot of that can be excused by her anxiety, but it does start to reach a point that I'm like, okay, but... And it's one of those things that if it is only meant to be 3 or 4 days and just I read it as longer than it actually is, my complaint completely disappears. 3 or 4 days makes perfect sense. It would take anyone that long to really realize that the cops are not going to help you, and and that you're gonna have to, like, you know, go elsewhere and do something on your own and figure out what the hell that is. Because objectively, yeah, if my sister disappeared in a town far, far away and I knew no one there and her husband was saying everything's fine, like, we've done what we can, I don't know what I would do about that. But it's also clear to me that the book does want the reader to feel that annoyance at her helplessness. That feeling of why isn't anyone doing anything, but what is there to do, is baked into the core of the narrative. And it is thematic. Like, it is introducing us to the theme of how wealth and power go hand in hand. How rich people get away with everything, and how there's a long history of cops refusing to help victims, especially female victims who are victimized by someone they trusted. How the old boys club vibes often exist between the wealth and power, and that lets monsters prey on those around them, and how cops often sweep things under the rug for the wealthy because the wealthy keep them in power. So this is all building on that theme, but it does make it a bit harder to read. And just generally knowing that that was the theme and that it is on purpose does not fully alleviate my annoyance that Nadine was sitting still and felt like she wasn't doing much for too long. But like I said, it all comes down to how long that time was meant to be. If it is a couple of days, there's no problem. But I do also want to say that even though I'm not entirely sure why, I'm not 100% happy with Odessa's end. And there's a red herring that got me so bad, I am still mad about it. Like, yeah, it was explaining something that had happened before. It might not have actually been intentionally a red herring, but it was so much a red herring in my head, it was so clearly foreshadowing, that I felt a hair dissatisfied when the ending did not involve massive destruction, you know, destroying everything around the house. Like, I was sort of expecting an explosion. The lack of explosion did bother me. But other than that, I really enjoyed this book. It is another book that I 1,000,000% will say is not for everyone. Especially the spicy bits. They are not for everyone. I think a lot of readers would read this more as a straight horror novel than a dark romance. But the thing is, it's a pretty damn good horror novel, and it's a pretty damn good dark romance. No matter which way you look at it, it is a quality book. It is beautifully written. It paints such lovely pictures. I loved a couple of characters and couldn't wait for the others to meet really sticky ends. It is saying something really interesting about what power and money can do to people, especially people who are already pretty damn terrible, and how power and money allow that moral blackness to infect everyone around them like a plague. It's just a great book. It's just a lot, and one that I will admit, yeah, if you have any, you know, difficulty reading, especially sexual violence, not the book for you. But I will also admit that it's a book that's heavy enough that I am specifically picking up something that was advertised as a book with absolutely no romance next. Like, that is my goal. No sex, no romance, because I just need a break after these two books. But it was really fun to read Wicked Flavors and Raise the Blood right after each other, because they are, in many ways, so similar, and in many other ways, such stark contrasts. It made it really fun to evaluate, and they were both reads that I very much enjoyed, and feel just a hair guilty for how much I enjoyed reading them.